Babysitters of Reddit. What seemingly normal parents had dark secrets? Somewhat wholesome story. I used to babysit for the kids down the street when I was in high school. One night I went into the parents' bedroom to get something, I think a puzzle, and there was a book on the nightstand called How to Comfort Your Kids When You're Thinking of Divorce or something like that. The next time I was over, there was a book downstairs, on the mom's desk, that was the couple's therapist's guide to saving a failing relationship. It made me sad because the parents seemed really happy together whenever I saw them. I felt bad that they must have been going through a hard time behind the scenes. My parents had a pretty unhappy marriage, so I tried to be extra nice to the kids. I hope they hadn't had to listen to their parents fighting. Anyway, this went on for a few months with no further indications of trouble. I felt like I knew this awful secret that the kids didn't know. One night I came over to babysit. The mom was in grad school and she had a class, and the same books were sitting on the counter. As the mom was leaving, she was like, "Oh, I can't forget the textbooks," and grabbed them off the counter. I actually didn't know what she was studying, so I asked what class she had. Turns out she was studying to be a couples and family therapist. The books I saw were her school books. In retrospect, that made complete sense because the titles were kind of academic, but I immediately assumed they were divorcing. About a decade later, they are still married and the wife is a very successful couples and family therapist. Go figure. Thanks for this story. My daddy hits my mommy sometimes. For that one, I was still in high school. I told my mom what she said and my mom went to the police station to report it. I like it when you're here, not the other lady. She's mean and she makes me sit in the closet. This little girl was referring to her dad's girlfriend. I told the dad about it and never saw the girlfriend around again. And for some comic relief, my older brother and I play swords in the bathroom. Daddy taught us how. Asked him to show me with his action figures what he meant, expecting the worst, and he says look, and goes in his dad's closet and pulls out these giant foam swords. Cue. Thankfully not all in the same house. My older brother and I play swords in the bathroom. Daddy taught us how. Asked him to show me with his action figures what he meant, expecting the worst, and he says look, and goes in his dad's closet and pulls out these giant foam swords. Give this dad the best dad award. I was babysitting for a local family who owned car dealerships. I answered the phone hello as one does, and it was the father who didn't know his wife had hired a babysitter so she could go to an appointment. He started in with the stupidest sexy voice until he realized it wasn't wife. He hung up. Later he was caught cheating. Not gonna lie, his loyalty had us in the first half. I never really babysat for anyone besides family, but I did dog sit for a woman and her husband for a while. She gave me a tour of the house the first time I went over there, and there was a room in the back of the house that was filled with dildos and other sex toys. She sold them as a side hustle and wanted me to know they were there in case I was uncomfortable. They paid me well and left a great review on the site I was using. I wish they never moved, lol. I love their dogs. That's nice that they had the forethought to show you the weird stuff they have so that you wouldn't feel uncomfortable if you found it by yourself. I nannied for this very rich family with 3 kids from the West Coast who would come to South Florida for summer vacation every year. The mother was in her 30s, clearly had her kids when she was young, and was very stereotypically hot, blonde, thin, big boobs, perfect teeth. Her husband was a little older, salt and pepper, super handsome, very George Clooney-esque. Their kids were all blonde haired, blue eyed, cute as frick. They absolutely adored their parents. Dad would help the kids and mom settle in at the house and then fly back to Cali for work. I babysat 5 times a week, 6:30 p.m. to 2 a.m. Mom would get all dolled up, leave her wedding ring on the kitchen counter, and come home very late, clearly drunk, and sometimes brought men home with her that she introduced as her friends. She would often overpay me, which I never complained about, but I worried for the I babysat a lot when I was 13-15. At the time I lived in a small town. I was a very popular babysitter as I also worked at the daycare center. Often I would have kids from 2 or 3 different families at once. I didn't care, I got triple the pay for having 3 different groups of kids. I was recently told why I always had groups of kids like that. Turns out the small town had a swingers club and I was the go-to babysitter for their different groups. Sounds like my ex, until she decided to join in, hence ex. One family I still don't know what was up with them. It's like they were squatting in a model home or something. It was a fully furnished house that looked to be straight out of Better Homes and Gardens magazine, but there was nothing in the drawers, fridge or cabinets. No toiletries in the bathroom except for toilet paper. No food or silverware in the kitchen. No clothes in the closets or in the kids' drawers, and no toys. The lady just told me to order food for the kids and they watched TV. It was weird. It could have been a second home or, well, not very good parents. I used to babysit for my next door neighbor who had an 8-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy. I was 13 when I started babysitting for them and I knew off the bat the kids were an interesting duo, to say the least. And I have too many stories to tell from when I was watching them. We all went to school together, so when we got off the bus, we'd walk to their apartment and I'd watch them, made sure we got homework done, and make them the snack of the day. One day, we had a half day at school, and I think the mom forgot, because when we walked into the apartment, I heard one of the doors shut. At the time, we thought it was an intruder, so I grabbed the 5-year's baseball bat, told them to stay in the room, and I do some investigating. I opened the bathroom door, and there was the mom, half naked, with a guy that wasn't her husband. She gave me all the money in her wallet and her business card. She was a photographer, and told me to never speak of it again. I caught her cheating and made out with $400 and a $650 photo shoot package. Took pictures for all the upcoming holidays so I could keep giving gifts to my family. I babysat them for about 3 months after, before they moved away. Snack of the day sounds fun. I was babysitting once and the kids were wrestling in the living room. All of a sudden the smell of dank filled the room. I hear the kids stop and say, "What is that?" One of them had knocked over a big tin can on a shelf and the parents' weed stash spilled everywhere. I sent the kids away and cleaned it all up for them and put it back. I babysat for the local policeman when I was teenager. He always came home very drunk and in a weird mood, and one time brought out a homemade Ouija board and persuaded me to take part with his buddies. Always paid me really well. Local policemen. Are there any more, or is it a very small town? If it's a very small town with only one policeman who uses homemade Ouija boards, that seems like the perfect setup to a horror movie. A family member of mine was a babysitter in the 70s. A couple who lived nearby asked her to babysit their baby a few times. I didn't get the sense that she knew them well. Every time she'd go they said the baby was sleeping and not to disturb the baby by checking on it. The baby never cried. The parents would come home and relieve her. She never saw or heard a baby. At the time I don't think my family member thought much of it, but has told me this story several times because it keeps nagging at her. How could a baby be asleep for the entire time she was there? Every time. No noises. Nothing. Today, she thinks there must not have been a baby but has no idea why they'd hire her. I used to babysit when I was around 13-14ish. My neighbors and 3 kids, ages 4, 7, and 11. The house was really nice, always clean and tidy. One time they asked me to babysit for a couple hours. Okay, no big deal. They paid me $6 an hour. When I got there they made the kids shake my hand and say thank you for babysitting us. I thought it was weird, but it was whatever. The parents left and the kids wanted those dinosaur chicken nuggets, so I made them some. As they were eating, the 7-year-old asked for a toy. She said it was in her parents' dresser. I didn't want to snoop around, but if she wanted the toy, I get it for her. I went into the parents' room and found the dresser. I opened the first one and all I see are stacks of cash. Okay, weird but not my business. I went back out to ask the girl what dresser drawer it was in. She goes over and literally points at the second drawer and said, "Oh, don't open that one. It has bags of sugar in it." That's what I hear mommy say. I was like, oh, okay then. She grabs her toy from the 4th drawer and runs off. I did take a peek in the drawer and sure enough, under the socks were bags of C. I was shocked but I didn't say anything. I put everything back where it was and left the room. When the parents got back I took the cash and left. Never babysat there again. TLDR. Babysat some kids and found C in the parents' drawer. I babysit 3-5 times a week. You'd be surprised at how many sex toys I see. A lot of them are just out in the open. like they forgot to hide them. I overnighted once and the guest bed had bondage straps. Parents totally forgot about that. That's not too surprising, but some of their kinks are. Probably the darkest was this 5-year-old girl I babysit. She was the victim of sexual assault for a couple years by an aunt and uncle. No charges pressed or anything. Mum and dad just cut all contact with that side of the family. I live in a small town so I see the aunt pretty often. It's sickening. They understandably have a ton of cameras set up in their house now and aren't gone for more than a couple hours. The child has a very weird bedtime routine, which is how I found out. Not so much as dark but really sad. I babysat for a typical upper middle class family. Dad worked, mom was stay at home. The mother was always a little overprotective, like checking on their daughter the second they got home, but I didn't think much of it. One night they came home and we talked a little. She mentioned how much she loved children and her daughter, so I asked her if they ever thought about having another. She completely broke down and explained that she had multiple miscarriages before and after her daughter, so they stopped trying. I felt really awful and really sad because it seems like she wanted another baby. I have found that so many women tell me about their kids or working on having kids, that even if it's a natural conversation point to ask about having kids, I won't. The risk that the answer would be hard for them is too high. If they want to talk about future kids, they'll tell me without being asked. I was babysitting for my neighbors, and they were super nice people. 2 kids, very Pottery Barn people. They would always come home late, with no cash to pay me, but they'd come by my house literally the next day with the cash, so I never minded. But I was always a little confused as to how they spent all their cash at dinner and a movie and somehow didn't plan to pay the sitter, and how they managed to stay out till 3 AM just doing dinner and a movie. And they were pretty wealthy, so it wasn't like once before they left, when they were in the other room saying goodbye to the kids, I went to move the wife's purse and saw a really big roll of singles. I brushed it off, but then another time their daughter had an allergic reaction and I texted them or SOS. When I got a call back, I picked up and heard club music. It was a couple sittings after that, when I left through the back door and saw the husband at the garage, shaking glitter off their clothes, that I realized they were probably going to a strip club. When I went to college, they switched to using my sister as a sitter, and I sat down with her and explained where they went and not to ask or act suspicious. They were good parents, and it's not like a problem. It was just super not the vibe they gave off, and I kinda found it hilarious. The internet has broken me. When you mentioned going to college, I expected the next line to be something about dancing for them at the club. I'm not sure if this counts, but this is my secret between myself and my nephew. My sister was 23/24 and she was going through her divorce. She and her 3-year-old son came to live with us. I was in high school at the time and devoted all of my after school time to him. He and I were close. We were so close I would be on the couch with him in my lap at 3 AM watching In the Night Garden for the billionth time. Still in my school uniform but now smelling of regurgitated milk and doing math homework with my left arm. Meanwhile my sister would be out partying and whatnot. One day, it was just my nephew and I. At the time he was I think around 4. I was in my school uniform, getting ready to leave for school. He was helping me get ready by putting his favorite toys in my bag. As I was heading out, I told him that I loved him like usual and he replied, "I love you too, mummy." I was stunned but I was already running late, so I brushed it off and went to school. After that, when we were alone, my nephew started calling me mummy. He was genuine. I asked him what about mummy and he tells me how she doesn't really love me. You love me, and nanny loves me. I tried to encourage him to call me auntie again and he did when others were around, but when we were alone, he looked at me with his sweet little eyes and called me mummy. He eventually says, "I wish you were my real mummy." Tantrums become more common for him. He throws them when his mum is around and begins to avoid her hugs. Her hugs were only there to pose for selfies and to show off what a good parent she is. He would start crying and screaming and get sent to his room for misbehaving. My mum, nanny, and my sister would go out and leave me in charge. I would then go to my nephew and give him a big ol' bear hug. I'm not the parent and he isn't my child, but our secret was mutual. I wished he were my child and he wished I was his mum. We had to keep our wishes secret because if my sister knew that I was ruining her image by taking all of the mother-son love, then heck would have broken loose. She was all about self-image to the point she became a compulsive liar, and she also has some other mental problems. His teachers noticed our bond when he entered primary school, and his after-school babysitters knew about his other mum. My nephew is 10 now. I don't know if he remembers any of this, but the other day was my birthday, and for the very first time, he tried to earn money through chores to buy me a gift himself. It was a Squirtle Amiibo. TLDR. My baby nephew and I developed a secret mother-son bond that only teachers and babysitters picked up on, and it had to be secret because his real mum is crazy. The world would be a lot better if we had more people like you around. I used a nanny for a family. At the interview they seemed totally normal. Even the first day wasn't too terrible. I quickly realized that both parents were abusive. Mom had severe anger issues and was medicated for some condition related to it. Dad was a borderline sexual predator who constantly talked about how gross looking his wife was and how if she didn't stop being a bee, he'd divorce her. Their kids were just as bad. One of them was also medicated for behavioral issues. I found out later that the reason they were hiring a nanny opposed to daycare was because their kids had been kicked out of the daycares in the area. Nope the frick out of that situation within a few months. When I was 13-14ish, I used to babysit 2 kids while their parents went to Amway functions. One night, for whatever reason, I looked behind the couch and saw a bunch of magazines. I collected them, thinking they'd been dropped behind there by accident by the kids I babysat. It was a huge stash of Penthouse and Playboy magazines, and I had to quickly hide them before the kids saw them. I was curious, naturally, but I told the mom when she drove me home. I don't recall if she said anything or not, but I stopped babysitting her kids shortly after that because I moved away. Seemingly a happy family, but the child had a lot of odd behaviors. The most obvious one was she'd cry if you laughed in front of her. Her mom told me the 4-year-old child would assume you were laughing at her. One time I group babysat at a neighbor's house with this child, and when the father came to pick the child up, the neighbor's dog went ballistic and tried to bite him. Shortly after it came out that the dad was abusing the daughter. Always trust the dog. I nannied for a wealthy couple. She was a surgeon. He was an architect, and the husband had a study in the house that the wife joked about never being allowed in. Now, I'm a nosy sucker, and I was curious about why you wouldn't let someone in a study, since it looked like a fairly normal room. Big desk, walls covered in bookshelves, books of architecture everywhere. So one day I just roamed around in there. I didn't really find anything, and I was kinda disappointed, but then I grabbed a book off one of the shelves. The thing had money pressed between its pages, about $500, if I had to guess. Picked up another book, found the same thing. I think I checked like 10 different books, and every single one had money hidden in it. Still not sure if the dude was just paranoid about banks or if he was intentionally hiding money from his wife. I was babysitting at my neighbor's house. They were a young couple, early 30s, with 2 kids aged 5 and 8. I was 16 at the time, and the first questions they asked me was if I had a boyfriend and if I was a virgin, because they didn't want me seeing boys while babysitting. I think part of the reason why they asked this is because they were pretty wild themselves and probably did crazy stuff when they were younger and babysitting. When they found out I smoked, they always left some cigarettes for me. They always told me that they'd be home around 12 or 1, but most of the times I would fall asleep and they would stumble home completely drunk around 3 in the night. They'd give me way too much money as an excuse, which I obviously didn't mind. After a while the dad started messaging me online, first just asking innocent questions, but after a while they became more sexual in nature. I told him I didn't feel comfortable with that, so he stopped. They broke up a while later and the mom started throwing wild parties at their home. I randomly walked by with a friend of mine once and she invited us in and gave us a beer. Me and my friend felt pretty cool. Here we were at a grown-up party, having beers, until the mom came up to us to offer us some tea. We were shocked and declined and left the party quickly after that. I told my parents a couple of years later about all this, after the mom and kids moved, and they were outraged. Apparently they always acted like they were very respectable. Can't believe you said no to free C though. I worked at a daycare center. To be clear, these parents did not seem very normal. Mom had fake inflated Kardashian size boobs and butt and was generally very conceited, like almost a stereotype of a person with a body that augmented. She stood out among the other parents who picked up their kids from the daycare after working 12-hour shifts scrubbing floors and doing other blue-collar labor. Large immigrant community. Dad was more down to earth, so it seemed. Younger brother, age 7, told me he was anxious one day. He tended to be a worrywart, so I wasn't surprised, but I asked him why. He says that his dad yells at his mom a lot because she gets drunk, goes out and parties with her friends, and then he has to go and pick her up, which leads to a lot of arguing. I told him that that's really sad and that we would say a prayer for them. It was a Christian day. A week or so later he excitedly told me that the prayer worked and his parents weren't arguing anymore. While Mac does say that all things are possible through God, so jot that down. I was only tentatively optimistic about YB's revelation. Older brother, 8, was a completely different personality, a bully to the kids and adults. Never had a positive thing to say. The things he seemed to like were his younger brother, Fortnite and Roblox, like you do. Most of the school year we had butted heads trying to get him to do homework, but towards the end of the year his behavior changed. He would say he was too stupid to do homework and would try to hold his breath to try and commit suicide, in his own words. This seems like a huge red flag, and he eventually broke down and said that his dad was abusive towards him and that his mom says she doesn't like being around him. While he was prone to lying, he was crying, something he never did, and his behavior was like nothing me and my co-workers had never seen. That was my first time calling CPS, and when the next school year started those kids didn't come back. Hopefully the kids are okay. I wasn't a babysitter per se, but my childhood best friend had a very odd family. They would all get naked and hang out around the house, which was adorned with fetishes and carved statues from Aruba and Jamaica. Work in an elementary school. A lot of horrifying, unexpected stuff tends to come up. I handle any behavioral calls, so tend to have a lot of contact with kids who are having trouble self-regulating in school. Sometimes these kids genuinely have a hard time, but often they can't regulate because they're in hyperdrive with what's going on at home. I had a mom tell me, in detail, the sex life between her and her ex. Another parent was arrested for drug trafficking and went to jail for 3 years a week after he'd attended parent-teacher conferences. Another parent got into a fight in the lobby and 911 had to be called. I looked after the neighbor's kid when I was young. They seemed normal enough when they moved in. Kids' parents were always away at work, but her grandmother lived with them and worked from home, so she was always there. The longer they lived there, the clearer it became that I was the only one looking after this kid. They weren't feeding her or paying any sort of attention to her, and grandma didn't work from home so much as play computer solitaire all day. Their dogs pee and crap all over the carpets and they just left it. They let the dogs wander outside unattended, and eventually one got hit by a bus. My mom took her to the vet and she recovered. They let her wander again, now mostly blind and crippled. Eventually she wandered off and didn't come back. They never looked for her. Eventually they moved. They tried to take the appliances with them, ripped the stove, cupboards, toilets, dishwasher, etc. out of the walls and tried to drag them out to their truck. Realtor caught them and there was a big fuss about it. These things were there when they moved in. It's been more than a decade and I still worry about that kid. I babysat for this one family only a couple of times when I was 16, but on the first night they just casually talked about how I needed to call the police if the kid's bio dad turned up at the house. I was then told I would need to barricade us all in their master bathroom and I should call them and their lawyer. Custody battles suck. I was a nanny for a young boy with additional needs. Let's call the parents John and Lisa. John worked for Lisa's parents as they owned a painting company. This company had the family surname as its name. One day I noticed John was home from work early in the painting van, but it had his surname as the company name on the van, not Lisa's parents' surname. I thought it was a funny coincidence that he and Lisa had the same surname, and so I pointed this out. He froze up and looked a little awkward and said, "Oh, that's because Lisa and I are first cousins. They shared the same paternal grandparents and therefore the same surname. They had been together since they were young teenagers. I'm not actually sure if this is legal or not, but it's certainly frowned up here. Depend on your state country. In some it's legal, in others no." not a deep dark secret, but as someone with 15+ years in childcare, it's pretty common for a lot of wealthy parents to prioritize their jobs and themselves over their kids. Kids can sense this and usually develop some sort of unhealthy way to get more attention. The response is usually to throw money at the problem instead of genuinely getting the kid help or re-examining their family structure. It's always so deeply sad to me. A few families I have worked for, I genuinely wondered why they had kids. I understand parents need a break and people have to work, but man, it was so sad. I babysat for a family with 3 wonderful kids. I genuinely did not like to babysit, but these kids were different. They were fun and nice and generally well behaved. We had a standing babysitting night every Saturday. On a couple occasions, I would call the night before if I was sick or couldn't come for whatever reason. When I called, the mom answered and said she understood. She sounded loopy. I didn't really know for sure what drunk sounded like, but that's what I thought was happening. The next night she would call to see why I was late and if I was still coming. She told her kids and husband that I flaked, but she confirmed my suspicions that she was blackout drunk. After a couple times of this happening, they stopped asking me to babysit. I didn't want to confront her about it. I missed her kids a lot and every time I passed by the house, multiple times a day I'd hope that the kids were well. I found out later that the parents were a lot worse than I knew. Drinking, partying, leaving the kids alone a lot. When I told my mom years later about the phone calls, she wasn't remotely surprised. I was giving the 4-year-old a bath and he asked me, "Why don't you touch me like dad does?" That was my first red flag. Eventually the dad would show up at home unannounced to just hang out with me when the kids were napping. I was 18. One day he got a vasectomy and told me if I wanted he could send a couple blank shots at me. A few days later he full on assaulted me. I locked myself in the bedroom and called his wife. She wouldn't believe me. I called my brother and he rushed over with a baseball bat. One family I babysat for was super big in the art world, super successful, had multiple homes, mansions, fancy cars, but the kids were weird. Specifically the older girl, who was about 8. Showed me a jar of baby mice that she had cut out of a pregnant mouse's stomach suspended in formaldehyde sitting on the windowsill in the kitchen. Something about that just did not sit right, and that was the last time I babysat for them. I was a live-in nanny for a local pediatrician's family, stayed with them for around 6 months. The dad moved overseas before his family to make sure everything was settled when they came. So basically, I was the second parent in the home while he was gone. During that time, I grew incredibly close to the mom, in a love-hate way. She opened up about how she has an emotional affair with a mutual friend of hers and her husband's. She would show me the conversation, countless "you're all I wanted" type of messages. I remember her asking about how she can do this while loving her husband. She replied, "I don't love him." In hindsight, I was going through my own relationship drama, so it seemed like a toxic bonding moment. My rose-colored glasses fell off when she admitted she flew across the country to go to a resort with him, all while telling her husband she was on a work trip. For reference, she had 2 toddler twins and a boy entering junior high. Pretty certain her oldest kid knew what was going on. I am a dude, and have had dogs for a large portion of my life. I live somewhere pretty close to a small park with a playground and I used to walk and play with my dog there frequently, so I would meet this woman who had an adorable daughter quite often. Both she and her daughter liked my dog, so it would often end up with my dog and her daughter playing for a bit while me and the mother were talking about stuff. I am quite laid back and chill. So after talking for some time, she asked if I would like to care for her daughter sometime if she was gonna be busy, as she trusted me. As I liked her daughter, I didn't mind. We ended up just playing Mario Kart and chilling on the sofa while I told her stories until she had to go to bed. The mother came home pretty drunk on a few occasions and we ended up sleeping together a few times. What she hadn't told me about was that she had a husband that was working offshore, the kind of work where he would be gone for weeks at a time with no cell reception. Something I kinda found out when I passed her house while walking my dog. Seeing a man working in the garage and the garden several days in a row. I asked the woman the next time I met her if she had met someone new, as I saw some guy at her home. Her face changed immediately and she poured it quietly all out to me. She was miserable with her husband cause he was an alcoholic and was rarely at home cause of work where he always worked overtime. She had fallen for me and thought that I was one of the sweetest men she had ever met, and she would rather be with me than with him. So her nice house, expensive car and all sorts of gadgets were paid by her husband, while I as a lowly middle-range wage man was boning his wife and bonding with his daughter while he was gone. I felt so bad about it, so I told her that we should stay as friends, but that I would keep her secret if she promised to care as well as she could for her daughter, and if crap hits the fan I would look after her daughter. It's been over 1 year now and we still occasionally talk, but I still feel pretty bad about it all. I just hope the daughter doesn't know. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.